Hello, my name's Deborah Jenkins, and I'm Chief Executive of TDI, a national charity that has worked for over 25 years to try and reduce the risk of grooming and sexual offending, particularly in public places. We've been wondering during this terrible crisis whether there's anything we can do to be helpful. And we've come up with this series of short slide presentations and exercises to help those of you that are working as volunteers and with community groups to try and help the people who are suffering most from this pandemic. We've got 4 short sets of slides with some exercises associated with them. It's a series of videos aiming to guide you through safety and safeguarding issues around volunteering, so you can do it with confidence in the current climate. In the first series, we'll be thinking about the potential for volunteer groups to be hijacked by people who have ulterior motives, who might, for example, be trying to perpetrate some kind of scam, or who might be trying to groom people, whether other volunteers or you, or the people that they might be getting engaged with as volunteers. So we hope you find them useful. I'll come back at the end of this video and tell you a bit about the next one.
The coronavirus emergency has seen the establishment of many thousands of new local volunteer groups across the UK. At the other end of the scale, the NHS has recruited hundreds of thousands of volunteer responders. These groups help their communities through actions such as befriending isolated individuals and assisting them with tasks like shopping and medicine collection. The overwhelming mass of volunteers have the best of intentions, but groups are always vulnerable to being hijacked by a tiny minority with criminal aims. We know individuals' behaviour can change in any emergency. What's happened in this one so far? The current crisis has in many ways brought out the very best in people, but any emergency also presents new opportunities to the unscrupulous. As soon as the pandemic started to affect the UK, the media reported a minority of people clearing supermarket shelves to stockpile goods for their own use. This led to short-term supply shortages and increased public anxiety. Some individuals moved beyond stockpiling by buying up in-demand items and selling them at massively inflated prices. While stockpiling and profiteering stop short of criminality, we know offenders also adapt to changing circumstances in any time of emergency. On April 10, 2020, BBC News reported that UK businesses had lost around £2 million to scammers offering online sales of non-existent protective equipment and supposed coronavirus test kits. We also know there have been cybercrimes, such as the sending of texts with embedded internet links to extract money from the unwary, such as by asking them to pay fines for allegedly breaching lockdown restrictions. Even more worrying, perhaps, we've seen an increase in face-to-face doorstep scams, such as bogus callers calling on vulnerable people in the guise of health and safety personnel, demanding payments for a fake virus test. Within households, we also know there's likely to be an increase in instances of domestic abuse, as there is whenever families are confined at home for extended periods. Similarly, levels of child abuse may also increase under the current circumstances. There have also been indications that the online targeting of children by sexual predators is on the increase, as both offenders and potential victims are likely to be using social media more than usual. As a volunteer in the community, you need to be aware of these changing scenarios, and particularly the fact that in your work you may come across both victims and perpetrators of abuse within households. In better news, whilst the current situation has created some new opportunities for offending, the coronavirus restrictions have seen an overall reduction in reported crime. For example, public order offences, unsurprisingly, are greatly reduced given the closure of the nighttime economy and the ban on groups from different households meeting up. Domestic burglaries, which usually take place when properties are unoccupied, are also reduced. From the early weeks of the restrictions, street violence and knife crime were reported as being down as much as 40% in London and the West Midlands. Some sexual offences are also down, though we must remember that up to 66% of these offences happen in and around families. Early estimates suggest that the total volume of crime in the UK had dropped by around 20% after 3 weeks of lockdown, which was by Easter 2020. There may be some protective factors in the current situation, as well as risks. For example, social distancing ought to mean that volunteers do not enter clients' homes or otherwise come within 2 meters of them. And travel restrictions would suggest that volunteering activity ought to happen as close as possible to where volunteers live. Thus, they are more likely than usual to be known already to others in any group they seek to join. Let's look at safeguarding for community groups. How do we best protect the vulnerable from other people who might do them harm? Safeguarding arrangements are led by local authorities, though various other organisations also have a statutory duty to participate. The arrangements aim to protect children and vulnerable adults from harm and are based on communication and cooperation between organisations. Volunteer groups can make a really important contribution, as they may spot signs of abuse or neglect which would otherwise be missed. The main categories of abuse volunteers are most likely to see include the following: physical abuse, sexual abuse or sexual exploitation, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse and exploitation, neglect, which could include self-neglect by people who are not able to look after themselves well enough, and domestic abuse. And remember that domestic abuse doesn't just mean violence, it could include any or all of the above. If you're concerned about anyone you encounter in your work for any reason, you should report it as soon as possible to the organisers of the group you're working with. Don't hesitate or delay. The exact process for reporting concerns should be made clear to you when you join. Group leaders should reassure you that you'll be supported if you ever feel the need to call the police in an emergency. For example, if you think someone is at imminent risk of harm or a crime has been or is being committed. These are the take-home points from this first short session. Safety is always an issue in volunteering. The current situation has just altered the risks and the responses. Though criminals are finding new ways to offend, overall crime levels have reduced. The social distancing restrictions provide some built-in protections, for example by preventing access to clients' homes. All groups need to ensure that volunteers understand safeguarding issues and how to report concerns. You may come across both victims and perpetrators of abuse.
This was the first of a series of 4 short videos to help you as you run a community group or volunteering and to keep volunteers safe. In the second of the videos, we'll be looking at the safer recruitment of volunteers. If you go to our website, you can find all 4 of the videos and the associated resources free to download. You can also find out more about our work, and of course, if you fancy, you can make us a small donation.